Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And in our ongoing series on Nobel Prize winners, tonight we're going to talk about Peter Grunberg, who died recently at the age of 79. Dr. Grunberg was awarded half of the 2007 Nobel Prize in Physics, along with Albert Fert, for the discovery of the phenomenon giant magnetoresistance. The two scientists discovered the phenomenon independently in 1988. Giant magnetoresistance is basically when materials are reduced to just a few atomic layers, a few nanometers in thickness, their properties change. It involves small changes in magnetic fields, which then creates major differences in electrical resistance. It has also had an impact on electronics, especially read heads, where information stored magnetically is converted to electrical current. Thanks to giant magnetoresistance, hard drives have become much smaller. Dr. Grunberg was born in Pilsen in what is now the Czech Republic, famous for its beer. He did most of his training in Germany. Here he talks about how he became interested in physics.
At one point in high school, I realized that this is a very interesting field, and that was when I was always wondering why do the planets orbit around the sun, and why is that motion? I couldn't explain it to me until I heard the explanation of Newton, that it is the attraction between masses which keeps the planet on their orbits. And I was so impressed by this discovery for me that I wanted to hear more about all these things, and I became very much interested in physics. That was with the age of about 15 years old, and then it remained like this. I stayed interested in physics.
He did his Nobel Prize winning work at the Helmholtz Research Center in Jülich. He spent brief periods of time in Canada and at the Argonne National Laboratory here in the United States. Here he is awarded the 2007 Nobel Prize in Physics at the awards ceremony in Stockholm.
Professor Fert and Professor Grünberg, you have been awarded the 2007 Nobel Prize in Physics for your discovery of giant magnetoresistance. It is an honor for me to convey to you the warmest congratulations of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. I now ask you to step forward to receive your Nobel Prizes from the hands of His Majesty the King.
Well, as I said, Professor Grunberg and Professor Fert came upon the concept of giant magnetoresistance separately in 1988, but it wasn't exactly a coincidence because they'd had a lot of contact together before that. And here Professor Grunberg talks about that.
On a conference in France in 1988, we had the ICM, which is the main magnetism conference in France, in Paris. And after that, we had the ICMFS in Le Creusot, and then both of us gave a talk, and after the talk we stated, yes, we obviously found the same kind of an effect. We found it in double-layer structures with two magnetic films, and Albert had a multi-layer structure, and therefore it was stronger in his case. But we realized that it is the same kind of physics which leads to this effect in the two different systems. So that was, one can really locate it to the conference in Le Creusot in 1988, when we heard from each other for the first time. Well, the history before was in a way similar. 2 years before that time, I had discovered the anti-ferromagnetic interlayer exchange coupling. I reported on that in various conferences. Albert Fert heard one of these talks and decided that for the kind of physics he is doing, namely magnetoresistance effects in diluted alloys, that would be an interesting configuration to investigate this effect also in the layer structures with the anti-ferromagnetic exchange coupling. So via this kind of coupling, we came into the same kind of area in physics. So it was in fact linked before already, only that I didn't know that he was looking also now into this coupling phenomena.
Even though this is called giant magnetoresistance, the giant refers to the change in resistance and it's actually a nanoscience phenomenon. If you take an alloy of three metals, with the top layer being the free layer and the bottom layer being called the pinned layer, the middle layer is the conduction layer. There will be electrons spinning in the top and the bottom layer, and if the middle layer is extremely thin on a nanoscale, then the resistance to electrons traveling in that conduction layer will largely be determined by the spin patterns of the top free layer and the bottom fixed layer. If the spin of the electrons in the top and bottom layer are in opposite paths, then the resistance to the travel of the electrons in the middle layer will be great. Once a magnet is introduced in this situation, the electrons in the free layer can be aligned in parallel with those in the pinned layer, and the resistance to travel of electrons in the middle layer and the conduction layer will decrease drastically. So this is a way of decreasing resistance in nanomaterials. And this whole science of spin of electrons has advanced considerably since the Nobel Prize in 2007. I tried to explain that with virtually no knowledge of quantum physics, so I oversimplified it, I'm sure. And more than likely I made a bunch of mistakes, but hopefully you get the idea. In any event, this decrease in resistance that can be created by giant magnetoresistance can be useful in a number of different areas, and Dr. Grunberg explains it here.
At the time when we started the research, then we just hoped to see to do interesting physics and get a new effect and so on. Of course, we expected that there could be an effect between the parallel and anti-parallel alignment of the magnetization, that the resistivity could change. We expected that, but we didn't think of an application at that time yet. But when we saw it really happen, then we were very much encouraged also to find a patent.
And here are some of the things that came from his work.
We did the experiment because we expected something. I expected that electrons which penetrate into a layer with the opposite spin direction as to the magnetization would be differently scattered at the interface than an electron which is parallel to the magnetization. And based on this expectation, then we expected that there should be a difference for the resistance between the parallel and the anti-parallel magnetization alignment in such double-layer structures. That's why we started to work on this, made proper samples and so on. In fact, we were wondering and discussing the application in hard disk drives so much, and I think economically this really was a breakthrough for the hard disk drives. But since we are discussing that now for many years, so I'm not so excited anymore about this. But I found that there are other applications where the giant magnetoresistance comes nicely very in, and that is for the detection of genetic material, which you can separate by magnetic separation. You can attach anti-genes to antibodies. You can attach the antibodies to so-called magnetic beads, and via magnetoresistive sensors you can then detect genetic material. And this is a topic which is very broad, and if it works, it has many applications. It works together with magnetic nanoparticles, which are super paramagnetic. So that is an application which is also discussed now for some time, and famous labs also zero in on this topic and treat that. So
the use of magnetic nanoparticles in biology was unexpected, but in fact it's a major part of biological research today.
In fact, it's a funny situation in this, because we are using magnetic nanoparticles in magnetic nanoparticles which are super paramagnetic, and we are used always from the hard disk drives, and so that super paramagnetism is, so to say, the enemy of application, and one tries to avoid super paramagnetism. And here, it's in this area, in these small magnetic particles, it's welcome. We want super paramagnetism. So this is another aspect, and which leads over into other areas in magnetism, and the magnetism of very fine particles, nanoparticles, and so on, and super paramagnetism.
Finally, he returns to the use of giant magnetoresistance in computers.
I really enjoy very much to browse in the internet and get so many information. So daily one can really experience the advantages of having computers, and for the computer it was also a very important contribution for the storage capacity of computers. So in this context, I found this also a very important contribution. But not only this, but as I just said about these genetic investigations, I think that also plays an important role.
One of the things he said that's not captured in this interview is when he got the Nobel Prize, people told him that giant magnetoresistance was used in iPods, and he wasn't even aware of that. One of the last things I want to mention are Professor Grunberg's religious beliefs. I'm always interested in the religious beliefs of these Nobel Prize-winning scientists. We discussed this in the Charles Towns podcast. Professor Grunberg did not mention this in his interview, but he did write this as part of his biographical statement. I would like to add a remark on my religious beliefs. Brought up rather conservative Catholic, I see religions now more or less in the spirit of the German dramatist Lessing's Ring parabola, which I would top by saying that not only does nobody know which is the right ring standing for religion, but there indeed is no such thing as a right or false ring. Per se, they are all equivalent. What really counts is how religions are practiced, for example with tolerance. And yet I believe that there is more than what we see, hear, etc., or can detect with instruments. But it is a feeling born out of many details of my personal experience, and therefore impossible to share or communicate. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. As I said before, Professor Grünberg was born in Pilsen in the Czech Republic, and it's only a little more than 60 miles away from the birthplace of the great Czech composer Antonin Dvorak. So as a final tribute to Professor Grünberg, I thought we'd play a little bit of Dvorak's music, his Slavonic Dance No. 7, played by the Israeli Philharmonic.
There were so many interviews. On the other hand, it's also nice to get some applause. It's always nice. You are confirmed that this was the right way to do something, and we have arrived at something, so it's a good situation.